Every single day, hundreds of thousands of people move between these four cities as workers commute, goods move, and businesses operate across a region that is technically separate but increasingly functions like a single place. Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio together hold roughly 70% of Texas's population inside a relatively small portion of its land. Their combined economy generates well over $1.5 trillion a year, placing it among the largest regional economies in the world. Dozens of American regions are growing fast right now, but what is happening inside Texas goes beyond population growth. Four fully formed city economies, each with its own century-old identity and its own industrial base, are being pulled toward each other fast enough that the physical gaps between them are visibly shrinking year by year. The Texas Triangle is the fastest growing area of its kind in the United States, and the forces behind that growth have been building for well over a century. So how did four separate cities end up on this kind of collision course? And what exactly keeps accelerating it? Between 1870 and 1900, Texas laid over 9,400 miles of railroad track in 30 years. Most American states, when the railroads came through, ended up with one city that absorbed everything around it. One dominant center that pulled in the population, the commerce, and the infrastructure, while everything else arranged itself in relation to it. Texas ended up with four, and the reason was that the state's economy was doing too many different things across too large a geography for any single hub to serve. Cotton, cattle, timber, and maritime trade were each happening in different parts of the state, so the railroads were built towards each of these cities rather than through one center. Houston became the gateway to global shipping lanes through the Gulf. Dallas grew into a commercial hub when the Houston and Texas Central Railroad reached it in 1872. Fort Worth locked in its identity as the western gateway for cattle and freight when the Texas and Pacific Railroad arrived in 1876. San Antonio deepened its role as the primary trading corridor into northern Mexico. Each city grew into a specific role because the railroad routes made that role economically sensible. And with four cities, each anchored by its own distinct function, none of them were ever in a position to simply absorb the others. Texas entered the 20th century with four distinct urban centers, none of them clearly above the others in importance. After World War II, the interstate highway system arrived and largely followed the same economic corridors. Day-long rail journeys became 2 to 4 hour drives, and goods, workers, and money began moving between the four cities regularly enough that something larger than four separate cities started to take shape. The cities stayed distinct, each keeping its own identity and its own economic center, while quietly becoming connected points in a shared network. For several decades, that network grew at a pace that felt manageable, absorbing more traffic, more freight, more people, without visibly straining at its seams. What nobody anticipated was what would happen once the economic pressures of the 21st century started pushing through it at a scale it was never designed for. What makes the Texas Triangle unusual among fast-growing American regions is that its four cities pull from entirely different parts of the economy and have been doing so for over a century. That separation of economic roles is the reason the region has absorbed downturns that badly damaged more specialized regions elsewhere. Houston is the energy capital of the Western Hemisphere. Its port is one of the largest in the United States by total cargo volume, with a large share of what moves through it tied to the energy industry. The engineering and technical expertise concentrated there gives the city connections to international markets that extend well beyond the boom and bust cycles of the oil industry. Dallas-Fort Worth functions as the main hub through which goods, money, and corporate decisions flow across the south-central United States. Its airport handles more aircraft movements than almost any facility in the country. Its position at the intersection of major highway and rail freight routes makes it the primary point through which goods move into surrounding states. The area now hosts dozens of Fortune 500 company headquarters, a concentration that keeps pulling in more of the same. Austin built itself around technology, state government, and its major research university. Computer chip and electronics companies along its research corridor make up a large share of the city's manufacturing exports. That base grew sharply through the 2010s and early 2020s as workers from more expensive coastal cities relocated southward, drawn by lower costs and no state income tax, with companies following their workforces. San Antonio anchors the southern end, connecting the region to northern Mexico through shipping networks that support cross-border factories, while its large military installations provide employment stability that holds through economic cycles in ways the other three cities do not. Together, these four roles cover energy, finance, technology, defense, and international trade without any two cities stepping on each other's ground. When oil prices fall and Houston contracts, the technology economy in Austin and the distribution economy in Dallas-Fort Worth tend to absorb the pressure. Companies making long-term location decisions respond to that kind of resilience, and their decisions bring workers, whose presence brings more companies. It is a self-reinforcing cycle, and it is the structural reason the Triangle has recovered from downturns that badly damaged more specialized regions elsewhere in the country. That makes the Triangle's transformation visible in a way no economic statistic quite captures. The drive is 80 miles. A generation ago, it passed through the city, giving way to suburb thinning into smaller towns, and open ranch land before the pattern reversed as Austin approached. That sequence is gone. Continuous development now spreads outward from both ends and from the towns in between, moving fast enough that researchers project the full corridor will hold several million people within the next few decades, functioning as a single unbroken stretch of development connecting two cities that were historically understood as 80 miles apart. New Braunfels, San Marcos, Kyle, and Buda are each absorbing large numbers of new residents annually, drawn by housing costs that remain lower than in the major city centers, while still sitting within a reasonable commute of large employers in Austin and San Antonio. Once enough people move somewhere, the shops, schools, and services follow, which draws more people still, and the cycle of outward expansion continues. North of Dallas, the same logic is playing out, where Princeton, about 40 miles from the city center, ranked among the fastest growing cities in the United States in recent years. These cities are expanding because the major metros have pushed their own housing costs high enough that the outer edges of their commuting range have become the most affordable option available within a practical drive. The daily movement figures make the integration concrete. Hundreds of thousands of people travel between the Triangle's four major cities every single day. The routine circulation of a workforce already treating the region as a single system with multiple centers rather than four separate destinations. On the freight side, Interstate 45 is one of the primary corridors carrying goods between the Triangle's major hubs, with heavy daily truck volumes projected to increase significantly in the coming decades as the regional economy deepens and the physical connections between its parts grow tighter. The Triangle is coming together through the logic of the highway and the housing market, through commuting patterns and supply chains and development pushing steadily into land that was recently open. The result is something that does not fit neatly into existing categories, geographically vast, economically tightly linked, still actively forming and growing faster than the systems built to hold it together. Texas leads the nation in locations where highway freight backs up and grinds to a crawl. Texas consistently ranks among the states with the most severe freight bottlenecks, with several of the worst located in Houston. Keeping Interstate 45 functional through 2050 will cost billions of dollars in basic upkeep before any widening of a corridor already carrying far more than it was designed for and projected to carry more than twice that volume within 25 years. The road network that made regional integration possible is now one of the main constraints on how well that integration actually works. High-speed rail has been proposed as the investment that could change the equation. A project modeled on Japan's bullet train network would connect Dallas and Houston in 90 minutes, less than half the current driving time, and could remove up to a significant number of vehicles per day from Interstate 45. The engineering and route planning work is largely complete. Political opposition from rural communities along the proposed path has stalled it repeatedly and has faced repeated political and funding setbacks, leaving the project without a clear way forward. Water moves on a slower timeline, but may be the harder constraint to build around. Texas's population could reach 51.5 million by 2070, and over that same period, the state's existing water supply is projected to shrink by 18%, driven by shifts in rainfall patterns and the long-term draining of underground reserves that has been underway for decades. Groundwater levels in parts of the state have dropped significantly over the past century, a decline that reflects the steady, compounding pressure of a growing population drawing on a resource that replenishes far more slowly than it is being used. Closing the projected gap between supply and demand is estimated to require over $100 billion in new desalination plants, water recycling systems, and reservoirs across the state. Water researchers frame the situation plainly. Texas is not running out of water. It is running out of water that is cheap to reach and move. As the triangle grows, the cost of keeping it supplied grows with it. And at some point, that cost becomes a genuine constraint on how fast the region can continue to expand. The Texas Triangle took 150 years to reach the form it holds today. Railroads gave 4 cities distinct economic roles that none of them chose, and none of them could easily give up, locking in a pattern of specialization that has defined the region ever since. Highways connected those cities into a network that made the distances between them workable for daily commerce and eventually for daily commuting. Decades of population and business growth filled that network and started closing the physical gaps between its parts, pulling 4 historically separate places into something that functions more and more like a single interconnected system. None of it was planned as a unified region. It became one anyway, through the accumulation of individual decisions that happened to reinforce each other across a very long stretch of time. What it becomes from here is genuinely uncertain, and that uncertainty is what makes this moment in the triangle's development worth paying attention to. The conditions that produce the fastest growing region of its kind in America are durable. 4 cities with complementary economies, a cost environment that keeps drawing companies and workers from more expensive parts of the country, and a growth cycle that has held through shocks that stalled comparable regions elsewhere. The open question is what the region builds as it grows. High-speed rail that has been planned for years sits unbuilt, while the corridors it would relieve carry twice their designed volume. Water infrastructure estimated at over $150 billion remains largely unfunded, while the underground reserves it would replace keep dropping. The Triangle has spent a century and a half becoming one of the most economically significant regions in the country. Whether it builds the infrastructure to match that scale, and how quickly, is the question that the next few decades will answer.